Thank you very much, Ken. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is truly a delight to see so many respondents to our outreach program. Our outreach, of course, is to try and bring leaders from the business community, from diverse elements of the business community, to Washington in conjunction with our 24th annual convention and dinner gala, in advance of which this morning you've accepted our invitation to hear from some of the most influential leaders in both the House and Senate. As we look at the 20th century ticking out, it is very clear that business in the new millennium will be driven by its globality, by technology, by customer patterns of behavioral change, and most importantly, by public policy. Public policy will shape and reshape, define and sort the winners and losers in the marketplace. It is therefore critical that those of us in the business community have an open line and a very clear sense of where our decision makers here in our nation's capital are headed. This is the third time I've had the privilege of chairing this CEO briefing, and each time that NEAF has extended the honor to have me serve in this role, I am always not just delighted, but I feel very, very privileged, because I know what a great role NEAF plays in the business community as a whole, as a rallying force for members of Italian heritage, but more broadly, as a centerpiece for multiculturalism. We are in a world today that truly is defined by meritocracy, by one being able to rise from the ashes, to start, as I've had the privilege, at the very bottom, that very bottom rung at the New York Stock Exchange, and to be so fortunate and blessed to be where I am today. NEAF, I think, is an organization that embodies the American dream. It takes a view that is not just for those of Italian heritage, but for all who have built this great nation, and serves as a forum. Of course, we're focused on the Italo-American community. Today we have the privilege of some of the leading policy shapers and those who will destine where our government and our nation heads in the new millennium, joining us for their view. We are initially joined by Senator Pete Domenici, who is, I understand, on the elevator, heading up. John Salamone, who is the extraordinarily talented architect of the gala convention and weekend, is frantically signaling to me. Dick, please talk about why Ralph Acampora has sent the market down 200 points this morning. Talk about trading 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Talk about anything I like until Senator Domenici arrives. So perhaps just a bit of an oversight on technology as it's impacting the world I live in. There was a time when orders coming to the New York Stock Exchange from disparate parts of the world, from customers both of retail and institutional scales, took the better part of several hours to be introduced, executed, and confirmed back to those entering customers. Today, that which I've described takes 15 seconds. One of our honorees at this weekend's gala event, I'm very proud to say, is a woman who has played an extraordinarily influential role in the shaping of one of the most successful technology companies in the history of this great country of ours. I'm talking, of course, about Pat Russo from Lucent Technologies, who is with us this morning. And we are so fortunate. I know each day my business benefits, Pat, from what has been described as the cyber world and moving data and capital at the speed of light. And you have been a true model of what can be accomplished, both in a human sense and in a technological sense. And we're very proud to be honoring you at this gala weekend. Pat will recall very fondly, as I continue to consume time until that elevator arrives, that the introduction of Lucent to the New York Stock Exchange, to public ownership, occurred on a very special day at the big board. And it has a linkage to this assembly, because coincident with Lucent's IPO day, President Oscar Luigi Scalfaro happened to be visiting the New York Stock Exchange. And what a magnificent portrait to have Pat Russo, Dick Grasso, and President Scalfaro standing in the trading crowd, if you will, the waiting room for the introduction of a great technology company to the big board. It was, I must say, Pat, as a result of that I was privileged to be awarded from the President a very distinct honor from the great country we all trace our roots to. And so it is now, having consumed the requisite amount of time for that elevator to deliver, one of the truly great leaders in the Senate of the United States, Pete Domenici, Senator from New Mexico, serving his 5th term, Chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, highly respected expert on the federal budget and our national economy. And I think it says it all in introducing Senator Domenici. To quote from the New York Times, Senator Domenici enjoys a universal reputation as one of the Senate's hardest working, most intelligent, and most intense members, a truly extraordinary legislator, and a great friend of the National Italian American Foundation. Please join me in welcoming Senator Pete Domenici. Senator, great to see you.
Hello, everybody. Hello. Hi, it's great to be with you. Buongiorno. Come va? Tutto bene? Hey, I'm better than you guys, huh? First, I thought that I might just tell you a little story. Some of you heard it, but I'm sure there's some newcomers that haven't heard it, about my first year in the United States, when I was first elected to the United States Senate. As many of you know, I was then the first Italian-American Republican ever elected to the United States Senate. And as a matter of fact, it might surprise you that at that point in history we had only had one other Italian-American. That was John Pastore, Democrat. So we didn't have a large representation in the Senate in the scheme of time. But frankly, you know, I was very, very young. I was invited to an Italian Republican event at one of the wonderful restaurants, and we had about 700 or 800 Italians who were part of the Republican Italians of America. Now remember, I come from New Mexico. You haven't run into a lot of Italians from New Mexico. But anyway, when I first arrived, they didn't know who I was, because they had never seen me before, and so I identified myself with my driver's license, and they then believed, the people at the front desk believed I was a senator. And then they said, well, we're going to sit you down, and your wife will sit at one table. She sat 20 tables away from me, and I sat up there, and the first thing that happened to me is a very big Italian fellow from New Jersey walked up. He tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, Senator Domenici, how many Italians do you have on your staff? I looked at him, and I looked down and said, Lord, what am I going to tell him? And I looked up, and I said, what? And he repeated it, and I said, none, mister, because the Italians in New Mexico are overrepresented by just me. So it all worked out. We had a wonderful evening, and I've been pleased to be part of your group and your meetings. I can't be here this weekend, so I'm very pleased to have a chance to speak to you a little bit right now. First, I would like to say I'm very pleased at the great success that Italian Americans are having in our great land. You might not know, but my mother and father were both born in Italy. My father never learned how to write English. He got here at 13 years of age, so he never went to school because he was tough enough to work. So he went to work in a mercantile store for the man who brought him to Albuquerque. And by the time he was 19, the man that brought him here decided to live permanently in Italy. His name was Leo Gradi. And he said, "I'll sell my business to you and your brother." So my father bought a business when he was 19 years of age. He spoke Spanish, Italian, and English, but only wrote Italian. And what a wonderful life we had. A small business grows a little bit more, and finally a nice wholesale grocery company. And I can tell you that the reason I share with such emotion and such sensitivity when I'm talking to small business groups, the reason I share the joy is because it was a very joyful thing for us children to kind of know my father was progressing and growing, because he used to bring the trucks home. As he bought a new truck, he would bring one home so we could all play around it as kids and feel the tires and get up in it and just know what's going on. What a wonderful thing American capitalism and American proprietorship and ownership is. Now it's changed dramatically from our day. But I want to report to you today that the state of the fiscal policy of our nation, that is the relationship of our national government and its taxes and its programs to a sound economy and to judicious use of tax dollars in terms of macroeconomics, we're in very good shape. The American economy is in a better condition than any economy in the world. And our fiscal policy is as good as any, if not the best. And we can all be proud of that. That means the United States has finally found a way to balance its budget and to begin to prepare for the onslaught of new senior citizens as the demographics change and obviously they enter retirement and Medicare needs. We are making giant strides when we try now not to touch Social Security trust funds to spend on ongoing programs. And it's a very good year to speak to that issue, because the first time in many, many decades, when we close the books for the fiscal year that we just passed, for the first time in history, there is a surplus in the Social Security Trust Fund, which means we have begun to retire some of the debt that we owe to the Social Security Fund. And another way, for you who wonder about America and its national debt, it's another evidence that we're paying down the debt, so that if in fact we do what many of us think and leave the Social Security money alone for the next decade, essentially from the economic and fiscal policy standpoint, we will have reduced the American national debt by $2 trillion, a rather significant achievement in a short period of time. Now there are still some running around saying you should put all of the surplus on the debt. I submit that $2 trillion in a short period like 10 years applied to a debt that we've accumulated over 40 years is a pretty good achievement by this generation. That means we're taking out of circulation, out of the economy, and putting on the debt almost 40% of the total national debt will have been reduced. The debt that we owe to outsiders, to banks, to foreign countries, to others that have bought our treasury bills. That's very exciting if we can stay on that path. And then I would just share with you, we will have a very significant philosophical battle once we finally decide we're all doing that, Democrat and Republican. Then the battle will be what happens to the rest of the surplus. And the rest of the surplus is rather significant. One way to look at it is about $1.3 trillion will be left over beyond Social Security to be spent or used or given back to the taxpayers during the next decade. And the philosophical fight and political fight has already begun. For because you can see on the Democrat side, those running for president clearly would like to spend it all. In fact, there's a recap of the programs promoted by them, and every cent of the surplus that does not go to Social Security would be spent in programs as they talk about what they would do for America. Republicans have a little bit different feeling. We have a feeling that some portion of that surplus should go back to you and all the working people and all the small business owners in the country by way of giving back some of the surplus that we've collected from the taxpayers of America. That's a pretty interesting debate. That's a pretty interesting debate, and when we're finally through in a year or two arguing about CBO and OMB, and we just say, here's the surplus, what do we do with it? We want to be in a position of not having committed ourselves to spend it all. That's why some fights are going on up here as to which new programs we should start, if any. That's why arguments are going on how do we fix Medicare, and if so, how much? And what do we do about prescription drugs? Because as you look at it, we follow Alan Greenspan pretty meticulous, most of us. And you know, my friend from Texas, the distinguished senator from Texas, said, you know, quoting Alan Greenspan is like quoting the Bible. You can find anything to quote, and anything you want to say you can find in the Bible, and you can find in his remarks. But essentially what we think he's saying is that if you have a surplus, a genuine surplus, the best thing to do with it is apply it to the debt. The second best thing is to give it back to the taxpayers, and the third and worst thing to do is to spend it. Now, frankly, we believe $2 trillion applied to the debt is enough. As a matter of fact, we don't think if you try to apply more that it'll last very long. It'll get spent. So we follow the second most positive thing to do, which he contends, and that's to give it back to the taxpayers. We're not giving it all back. We're going to keep a very large sum of it for American needs in the field of education, try to fix Medicare some way so that we have some prescription drugs, at least to some significant degree, and for some very large part of our population. Those things can be done and still have a portion to give back to you and the other taxpayers of America. But overall, no matter where you look in the world, our economy and our economic future is brighter than most. You all know and what's happened in the New York Stock Exchange and other stock exchanges in the United States over the past 6 or 7 years, and it's rather miraculous, rather significant. The accumulation of wealth by the average American is astronomical. The percent of American families and households that own an interest in the equity of American business has grown astronomically, and we don't want to rest till every home owns a piece of American equity, a piece of American business. The more the better. The more they will understand what makes business succeed, and the more they will understand that you can talk about big business and you can say they got to follow rules and regulations, and they should. But just to conclude that business is not the most vital energizer of American growth is to absolutely ignore the reality of our kind of capitalism, and in particular, small businesses. You know, Europe's having a terrible time, even with their new union. They aren't quite sure how this is all going to break out for them. And guess what? Almost everyone attributes their failure, both Germany, France, and others. Most attribute it to the fact that they have laws that make it almost impossible for businesses to grow, prosper, be mobile, change the way they do business with changing times, because they have such restrictive and onerous regulations imposed that small business can hardly start up. A small business can't start up with 5 workers if in fact they cannot reduce the workforce the second year down to 1 if they're not making it. It's impossible. And now they're beginning to ask kind of questions about that, and we talk with them and say, when are you going to change some of these very onerous laws? And secondly, they rely on their business to pay way too much of the social welfare net for their country, such that they are so overburdened that even the great companies of Germany are becoming non-competitive. You're aware of that. They're moving out of Germany. The competition is severe in the world, and their government doesn't let them be competitive by way of the kinds of things they take from them, rather than leaving more of it there for them to grow, prosper, and be competitive. So you look around the world, and we're very fortunate. I went there just before the union was created, and I heard from a number of leaders, I won't tell you which ones, but they said, we don't want your kind of capitalism, we have our own. And I suggested to them, well, in one case, you'll all know who this is, but I suggested to a German leader, well, that's fine. You seem to have had 9 to 12% unemployment for the last 15 years, and it looks like it's getting worse. We surely couldn't stand that in our country, so we have to do something different. If you can stand that, want to pay high workman's comp and unemployment comp and have that kind of unemployment. Maybe you think that's a great social application of business to lifestyles in your country. We don't think so. You can pick each one and look at it and find that we're doing things different. Now I want to close by saying there's two things we better be concerned about, because we will not continue as a great nation and prosper in the way we have and live up to the expectation if our school system, the system whereby the majority of kids are educated, is not improved dramatically. And frankly, you as leaders in your respective communities, you cannot just sit around and read a newspaper about education. You have to get involved. And essentially we must have better teachers teaching the children better, and we have to have parents who are more responsive. How we get there may require that we pay substantially more to teachers, but obviously we have to have some kind of assurance that if we do that as a nation, that we're going to get better teachers, or conversely, or flip side, that those who aren't teaching well won't continue teaching indefinitely. Those are the kind of things we just have to face up to. Our kids have to be better educated, not worse educated than the world, because we have decided that we're going to be in international trade, and that as part of that, we're going to try to keep the high-skilled jobs in our country. And if you're going to keep high-skilled jobs, you have to have high-skilled workers. And as a matter of fact, most recent polls of business people would suggest that the number one reason that businesses are not growing more than they are is they can't find enough workers qualified to do the jobs for the businesses. I don't know where you stand on that, but that's been the number one or number two as the polls have been taken of medium and small size American companies. What inhibits you from growing another 5% next year instead of the 3.5% you plan? And they are regularly saying we can't find enough workers that are skilled and capable of handling the jobs. So that's one. Without any question, we've got to fix that, and we've got to be concerned about it. And secondly, there is no question but that we must continue to be vigilant about American economic policy. We have to be sure that we are not turning this golden goose, the goose that lays the golden egg. We've got to be sure we're not strangling it in an effort to do more things for more people. I believe we're on the verge of entering a millennium where I'm reluctant to say it as boldly as I am, but I will, that maybe we won't have the business cycle appear very often in a 15 or 20-year period. It might be that we've even found a way that we won't have the constant threat of recessions that confront us from time to time in our history that are so onerous and frequently cause us to make some very erroneous public policies as we try to solve them. I don't know exactly whether that can be done, but I do believe that I want to close by saying if we had to pick one person most responsible for the American economic success of the last 6.5 years, it would probably be the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, Alan Greenspan. And I would imagine some of you from time to time have disagreed with him. For you read and catch on when somebody says if they just lower interest rates even more and more, we could grow even more or more. But I think they are beginning to understand enough about the economy to practice some anticipatory, or in advance of problems, anticipatory solutions to inflation and the like. For I would ask for those who say loosen up the money, Alan Greenspan, there's no inflation in the economy. Would you like to wait until there is and then ask him to take care of it, or would you rather say maybe we can ease into this and not have inflation occur with all of the positives that come with it? For without doubt, it doesn't sound very politically sexy, but it is true that American economy prospers when you have low inflation. It is the most significant fact of life about prosperity in America, because low inflation normally brings low interest rates, which normally brings housing to more people, automobiles to more people, people buying more, and so on down the line, and even people saving more. So I close today saying I'm hoping that all of you and many more have a wonderful time this weekend. I'm usually at the dinner, but I can't be there this time. I have to go home. As a matter of fact, I usually dress like most of you, in blue with red ties and striped ties. But I'm going to New Mexico, so I'm dressed a little bit more casual. And I think you'll have a great time. But I hope you know I'm going to have a great time in New Mexico, too. Thank you very, very much. Okay, we'll take a couple of questions. Yes, Mr. Frank Stella.
Whenever you have a surplus, I mean, it's a good thing. Why is it that we're having debates about how we're going to distribute the surplus now? Why couldn't, as you prepare the budget and as you get it approved, have in there that if we make a certain amount, it will go for this or that, so automatically, if you reach that stage, you're able to apply it where it should go at that same time?
Well, frankly, I have been probably the principal advocate and perhaps even the principal architect of refunding to the taxpayers over a 10-year period a piece of the surplus as we projected and expected, and doing it now. And frankly, that comes from experience, that if you wait around until you collect all these taxes, you will spend them. And it was my opinion that we ought to start a 10-year wedge, giving back to the public with a law passed today, a ever-growing portion of the surplus, but do it now so that what we're saying is we're never going to collect it. We're not going to collect it. And so nobody can sit around and plan to spend it. Now, it's not exactly the way a business would run, but we have pretty good indication that the surplus is going to be pretty big, and it's going to be there. And I still believe that if you don't say to the government, we have already passed the tax bill and we only have this much left to spend, that each year we will find something new to put on the litany and inventory of American programs, some of which will end up costing huge amounts in the out years, and then the taxpayer won't have any chance of getting it back when it comes to that year that you suggest we wait until and see where it is. There won't be anything there. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Is the American public still strong enough that Congress receives several 100,000 letters saying, hey, we want 40% of it to go towards the debt, and we want some of it for ourselves? Could that still make Congress react? Is the American public still strong enough to make that happen?
Well, I think so. I don't think anything like that's happening. That's a very, very enormous expectation of the American people, that literally 40%. How many would you like to write and say 40%? Would you like 40% of the people to do it, or?
No, I was thinking several 100,000 people wrote.
Yeah. Well, look,
Maybe several 100,000 wrote in and requested that. Is that still enough to help move Congress?
Well, I think for some senators it will not be. For some it will be adequate. For some senators there is a legitimate rationalizing and reasoning that is different from mine and different from yours. More like, we got an awful lot more American problems. We ought to keep the money around and see what we have to solve with them. I've been through that enough that I'm quite sure we will invent them, and I'm quite sure there will be plenty of people saying there are. But I'm also suggesting how big must the surplus get for you to give some back to the public? This is a very gigantic surplus if we stay on path. And frankly, if you wonder whether it's realistic, we do not have very optimistic economic growth scenarios in this 10-year projection. In fact, they're very modest. And if you wonder whether we even anticipate a recession, the way that those numbers have been calculated, we anticipate 2 recessions. They'll be small according to the expectations of the economic modelers, but we expect 2. And still this surplus is very, very large. And you know it's come from American growth, it's come from American business and American workers and American people just busting themselves to get ahead, and from the enormous increase in productivity, because the increase in productivity is keeping the inflation down. And it's coming, that productivity is not coming as it did 40 years ago by just literally improving the work capacity of an individual. Productivity is coming because we're giving tools and equipment to workers, like computers and all the other things that make their man hours so much more productive, and that's the reason we are succeeding right now. I think it'll keep on. I think the breakthroughs in technology that applies to computers and communication are turning that stuff over every 2 or 3, 4 years. And that means more productivity of a new type. Yes, sir.
John DeLuca, California wine industry.
Hi.
Good to see you again, Senator.
Thank you.
We're operating now under a continuing resolution with regard to government,
Yes, sir.
and we passed that October 1st deadline, and it appears that we're going to continue with a continuing resolution. How do you see the scenario unfolding for the administration and the Congress to agree to how we're going to fund the government? We're talking about surpluses for the future, but we haven't been able to determine how we're going to operate now.
Yeah. Well, first, I'm not sure that I should be happy. Hello, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure that I should be satisfied by telling you what's happened in the past, but you know, it is every year we come up with this issue of we didn't get all of our appropriation bills done by the beginning of the fiscal year. So I'd like to tell you, sort of in a strange way, what else is new. For in the past 35 years, we have only done that 5 times. 30 times we have not had our appropriation bills done by the end of the fiscal year. We even tried moving the fiscal year from July to October because July seemed too quick for us to get our work done, so we moved it to October, and we don't get it done by October. I think there are a number of reasons for it. First, I'm an advocate of not doing those every year. I think we ought to do the appropriations every 2 years, and we'll have a full-blown battle over that next year in the United States Senate. But each year we go through this, and I think more are saying, why do it every year? Why not do supplementals in the second year? At least you finished. But here's what I see. I think there's going to be a battle over four bills, and the President's going to make a decision whether he really wants to negotiate one bill at a time. We will have 11 bills for sure finished before this expiration date, and they will be in the hands of the President. That means that there will be between 2 and 3, depending upon whether my number's correct, that are not going to get signed. Will the President negotiate each one with us, or is he advantaged by putting them all in one package and saying, I don't want to negotiate on one, I want to negotiate on a package? I surmise from what I'm hearing out of the White House, including the President's talk last night, that he probably would like to package them up into an omnibus bill and negotiate on a broader front. He may be more successful in getting more of what he wants if that occurs. We're committed in the Senate, don't know about the House, to negotiate one bill at a time, because that's what we passed and done, one bill at a time. We also stand ready to give him a continuing resolution, short or long, for whatever remains to be done, so that if he wants to keep government open, all he needs to do is sign it for an extended period of time. That won't be untoward either. Presidents have signed as many as 6 continuing resolutions in the past in order to get the work done. But if he wants to threaten to close down government, we're going to be suggesting that it's his fault, not ours. We're giving him an opportunity for a week at a time until we get it done. I hope that doesn't occur. We ought to work with the President and get it finished. If the White House chooses, they may also begin in a little more depth and with a little more vigor what the President spoke of last night about gimmicks in the budget. Frankly, if we get involved in that, we will prove that the President is the biggest gimmick, has the biggest gimmick-filled budget ever produced this year. The only reason he met the targets is because he had gimmicks everywhere. Even some of the gimmicks he accuses us of, advanced funding, which doesn't matter to you, but it's just a word. He had $19 to $20 billion worth of that to make his budget match, and he's calling it our 13th month. He had as much 13th month in his as ever been in any budget in the past. So we'd rather not have that war, but if he wants it, we'll have it full-blown, and we'll produce a budget that on our numbers won't use Social Security. And let's hope we get the government finished, the work finished, within the next 15 to 25 days. You have another speaker, I think. And you're going to speak, aren't you? Yeah. Okay. So I'll take one then.
Based on the baseline economic assumptions, we project out on our economic models as what our surplus is going to be. And I used to understand that we did 5 years comfortably. Are you comfortable with going 10 and 15 years of projecting our surpluses when we really have difficulty in knowing where we're going as an economy a generation from that? I can understand a few years, but 10 or 15 years to get these huge surpluses that we're talking about spending. Does that give you a comfort factor?
Well, look, I've been part of taking it from 1 year, and the reason I moved it, worked hard with others to move it away from 1 year into multiple years, is because everybody found a way to take care of 1 year and didn't give a damn about the third or fourth year. So it's the flip side of yours. They would say, since we don't know, why don't we just put this new program in? And so we went to 5 years trying to, and then we even put some enforcement mechanisms in that said you got to have 5-year estimates and you got to take those into consideration before you can do certain things. The step to go to 10 actually occurred this year. I will tell you, it's somewhat embarrassing, I guess, but the president decided, and it was the major gimmick of all, now that I think about it here, that he would go 15 years. And he put 15 years in his budget, and that made it look like he was going to save all the Social Security money, because then he could spread saving it over 15 years, and really he was spending 30% every year. So we said, let's go 10 and not go as crazy as him. Maybe we went, ours also maybe a little too far. But I think we know how to model program costs better than we ever have. So I think the estimates of Social Security, Medicare, pensions, and the like are damn good. And I think they're pretty reliable. And we know all about the demographics, and they're all plugged in. So I think the only thing is the tax take. How much tax revenue are we going to get? And you make a point. It's a good point. But I would remind you, if you do a 10-year tax bill that's implementing each year, you could in the 7th year delay it for a year or two. But the good thing would be that you have taken the money away from the government in terms of spending it in advance, because you've already committed to give it back. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Senator Domenici. We are truly blessed to have your presence each year at the NEAF convention. We are now privileged to be joined by the chairman of the House Commerce Committee, Congressman Tom Bliley of Virginia, who is serving now in his 18th year in the Congress, with a long and distinguished record of achievements, including the modernization bills that impacted the Food and Drug Administration, the telecommunications industry, and securities litigation reform. Congressman Bliley has been, in each of his years since election to the Congress, been pointed out and recognized as an outstanding legislator committed to balancing our federal budget. I think the Louisville Courier-Journal sums up the congressman's impact by saying and alleging the congressman to be the most powerful Virginian to serve since Harry Byrd. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chairman Tom Bliley. Chairman?
Thank you very much, Dick. I didn't feel very powerful this morning. We are down in the bowels of this basement working on a conference. A conference occurs, of course, as most of you know, when a bill passes the House and passes the Senate. A conference committee is appointed to work out the differences between the bills before you send it to the president. And we are down there working on a bill close to Dick Grasso's heart, the financial modernization bill, or the reform of Glass-Steagall. A Virginian was one of the architects of the original bill, Carter Glass from Lynchburg, who helped write the Glass-Steagall bill in 1933. He realized 1 year later that he thought Congress had gone too far, and he tried to kill it. And we have been trying to overhaul it for the past 60 years. And every year or every other year, somewhere in the train would get derailed, either by one side or the other, and this is the farthest we've come. Last night we had agreement between Secretary of the Treasury Lawrence Summers and Alan Greenspan, the chairman of the Fed, on what banks would be allowed to do within banks and what they call op subs. I said, you know, if I go home and tell the average person on the street, start talking about op subs, and they say, what kind of sandwich is that? They got no idea. But anyway, operating subsidiaries, and part of that's worked out. We also got it worked out with the provisions on securities to leverage satisfaction. So we're making progress. Now the big issue is going to be two things: CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, or as I call it, the bad loan provision. If it's a good loan, the banks scrap for it. I mean, you shouldn't. And this is to make marginal loans, and that's going to be a big hassle. And the other is privacy. Now, what we adopted in the House on privacy is that the financial institution, the bank, cannot give your information to third parties without your permission. So you have the right to opt out, to say to the bank, I don't want you giving my financial information to some marketer so they can call me at between 6 and 7 at night when I'm trying to relax, maybe have a beverage and get ready to eat and try to sell me something. And that's a really reasonable position. But one of my colleagues on my committee from Massachusetts, Ed Markey, wants to put an opt-in. It means that you have to give affirmative action to allow the bank to even share your information with its affiliates, which is totally unworkable. I mean, why would the bank want to buy the affiliate if it can't use the information it gets? I mean, it doesn't make much sense, but there we are. And I was late coming up here. I was due here at 10:45 because we were arguing I was arguing with John LaFalce from New York. Some of you may know John. He wanted to knock out a provision we put in, which said that if the state of New York decides that a mutual company cannot become, with the permission of its policyholders, a stock company, and cannot move, that they should be allowed to do that. Well, most states would like to have laws that would not allow companies to move out of their states. Very well would like them to move in, but not allow them to move out. But that's a taking, and at least I believe, and that they shouldn't be allowed to do that. So hopefully we will prevail on that amendment today. But that's what we're doing. Otherwise, in the Commerce Committee, we have everything on our jurisdiction, people say, from AIDS to zebra mussels. We are hopeful to mark up a bill next week on electricity deregulation to allow people to choose who's going to provide the electricity they use. Not the distribution, but there won't be new lines laid, but who generates it. And it's estimated that we'll save people 10 to 15% of their electric bill. I see Dick's eyes over here light up, considering all the electricity he's using, particularly today with the activity on the market in New York. So that's a major piece of legislation that we're working on. We also expect to pass out of the House a very important piece of legislation for the age in which we live in with the internet, and that is a digital signature bill, which would enable you to have an electronic signature for use in cyberspace, which would be just as valid as a signed contract for purchases in commerce on the internet. It would not apply, for example, though, to domestic law, to wills or to powers of attorney or things of that nature. So those are just some of the things that we're involved in. If anybody has a question, I'll be happy to answer one or two. Then I'll have to get back to my conference to protect my interests.
Right here.
Yes.
The age that we're in is just wonderful. The internet is providing us with a whole new array of goods and services. But when you talk privacy, we've got to have protection because people know where each of us live. They can tie in Social Security numbers, which you have to give, and they can find within 2 minutes where each of us live in the morning, and it creates a great danger to our privacy and our personal freedom. So I'd like, not that we're thinking of that today, but we need to think about that today. So,
well, we do need to think of that, and companies such as America Online and others are developing software to help in that area. And we really, you know, I often wonder when people talk to me about privacy, I often wonder about, you know, we go to a restaurant and we have a meal and we hand and think nothing of it. We hand the waitress or the waiter our credit card. What do they do with it? You know, we don't know. We think they know. They go back there and they fill out a form and they bring it back to us and they sign. But they've got it. They've got our credit card number, and you know, these things can happen. There's always going to have to be a certain amount of caveat emptor. Buyer beware. I mean, you're going to have to do that. And government can protect you so far, but they can't totally protect you.
Congressman, I'm just going to share with you an anecdotal story. I made a contribution to someone in government. They asked for my Social Security number. My office gave it, saying it was part of a process. I am now opening accounts with that Social Security number across many shops in the United States because they have been able to match that Social Security number with a lot of other information. So I'm just anecdotal evidence.
Well, it happens, and you know, one of the things that they ask you they advise to you not to do is to put your Social Security number on your checks. But most people have it on your check. You know, you have it on your driver's license. I mean, so many people, and divisions of motor vehicles, including my own in Virginia until recently, sold those lists to marketers. You know, you own 2 cars, you get on a certain list. You own 3 cars, you get on a platinum list. You know, and marketers use this information, and we need to curb that. But government has been just as guilty as the next one in passing out information about ourselves. And I'll take one more question, or dodge it as best I can. I didn't dodge that one too well, but anyway.
Mr. Chairman, knowing that you're doing the work of the Lord just 3 floors below us, we are going to let you go.
I think he's more interested in me protecting his bailiwick than he is mine.
Thank you so very much for joining us, Mr. Chairman. We are next going to be joined by the Chairman Bill Archer, but before Chairman Archer joins us, as one knows in the business world, 2 vice chairmen are never worth the power of a chairman. The chairman has joined us. If I can ask him, Mr. Salamone, our chairman, is going to join us for a word of welcome. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Jack, and I certainly do welcome you. I enjoyed the Senator's speech and Tom Biley. They were all colleagues of mine, and I spent 6 years on the Budget Committee, so when I asked them about the baseline economic assumptions, we only used to go out 3 to 5 years. Now they say 15 years, there are trillions of dollars out there, and you just wonder who can really be so knowledgeable as to be able to project the economy so far. Well, our purpose of NIAF here is to really bring you together. You are the leaders of some of the largest companies that we have in our country, and we're very, very proud of our icon, Dick Grasso, who started off in the stock exchange at the lowest entry level, and then in the whole history of 206 years of the stock exchange, went up through the ranks to president, executive vice chairman, now chairman and CEO, and still a very, very young man. And what I like about Dick so much is that it's just not that he is able to walk and be comfortable with the giants of industry. But back home, Bill Archer, I'm only filling in now, so I'll let you go on in a minute. Bill Archer is the chairman of Ways and Means Committee, which I served on for so many years, 14 years while I was here in Congress, and is a dear friend of mine, and we just had a good discussion yesterday. But the thing about Dick Grasso was that back home, he's the deputy police chief in Brookville, New York. Back home, he's trustee of his little municipal corporation. So that there is no job that is too small, and there's no job that is too large for a man like Dick Grasso. And Dick, I'm very proud to have you as my friend and our leader and the vice chairman of NIAF. This is the 6th annual economic conference we've had. We will continue to have these. And we really want you people to know that NIAF is interested in the economics of getting people together. We're interested in our national economy. It's not just scholarships and things of educating our young people, which is important on our agenda, but you, the business leaders that make America work and provide the engine for our economy to keep going forward. So I welcome you. I thank you for being here and look forward to seeing you over the weekend. Bill, I think they're going to bring you on now, so I'll turn it over to Dick Grasso. Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming.
Well, we are indeed privileged and honored to have with us now the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Congressman Bill Archer. Congressman Archer is in his 15th term in the Congress, having been elected to serve the 7th District of Texas in 1970, succeeding George Bush. He has chaired the Ways and Means Committee since 1995. He also chairs the Joint Committee on Taxation. His accomplishments are extraordinary, both in substance and in the long length of list. He is committed to fiscal responsibility, to taxing policies that make sense in terms of stimulating economic growth, forming capital, raising standards of living, a true champion of the model we in this great country of ours have devised to the envy of the rest of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chairman Bill Archer.
Dick, thank you, and I'm honored to be introduced by one of my idols in the American marketplace, the greatest marketplace that has ever been devised in the history of mankind and womankind. I guess mankind may be not generic anymore to a lot of people. Dick, I couldn't help but think, and I'm going to digress just very quickly, to tell you, yes, I did succeed George Bush. He is my most famous constituent and still is in my district, and in fact offices in the same building that I do in Houston. And after the 1994 election, I called him and I thanked him for the help that he and Barbara had given to make our new majority possible in the Congress. And then I said, do you realize that if you had just stayed in the Congress, that you could be chairman of the Ways and Means Committee? And we got a chuckle out of that. Being chairman of the Ways and Means Committee is a heavy responsibility because, as probably you know, we deal with all taxes. Everything that takes money away from you comes through our committee. We have total jurisdiction over trade, which is a bigger and a bigger factor in our lives and will continue to be bigger in the next century. We have complete jurisdiction over Social Security, over Medicare, over unemployment compensation, and over the management of the debt. 50% of the money that's spent here comes through the Ways and Means Committee, and the other 50% comes through the Appropriations Committee. And I never fail to realize this enormous responsibility. I also want to tell you generally that I think it's great that there are organizations such as yours. One of the great strengths of America is the cultural differences that we maintain but they have to be put together to where we all work together. And then we have the best of all worlds. To my knowledge, I have no Italian background. I wish I did. I think I would be a stronger and a better person if I did. But the cultural background that I have that comes from France and from Germany and from England, all mixed together, and blending with the cultural background of so many others in this country is the great strength of America. I don't know how we pulled it off, really. Other countries can't seem to do it. And we still have our problems, but we have. So I just wanted to share that feeling with you and to tell you that I also, after 29 years, never lose sight of the fact that where we are today is the center of freedom for the entire world. And how important that responsibility is that we have as leaders of the world. And I remember as I look back on Jefferson and Franklin and the others who created this great country, that they said over and over again, liberty has never come from government. The history of liberty is the history of the restraint of governmental powers. And if we ever lose that, we little by little will lose our individual liberty. And it can slip away very gradually and in a way that we don't even realize it. And I am forever conscious of that. I believe, as my father did, that this country was built on 5 basic characteristics: individual initiative, personal responsibility, self-reliance, thrift, and religious faith. That those are the cornerstones on which America has been built. And once again, I think we always need to remember that. Particularly, maybe we need to remember today thrift. I was fortunate enough to be in New York a little while back and be given a wonderful briefing by one of the investment brokerage houses there. Took better part of a day. And they were very bullish on the market and on America, and I was fascinated to hear all that. But there was one thing they were concerned about, the one cloud on the horizon, and this will be the theme of what I want to tell you today as I work it into the issues that are before us. And that is the dearth of private savings. Our private savings rate in the U.S. today is at an all-time historic low. It is negative. And if the foreign sources of investment on which we are dependent today ever begins to repatriate and go back to their own countries, we potentially have got real problems. And I want to try to help in every way that I can. I've watched for too many years that the tax policies of this country have virtually confiscated savings. And you can look back over the last 20 years, ever since 1981, and every tax bill has driven a spike in some way or another through savings until 1997, the bill that we were able to pass and get signed into law. And whether it's pension plans, which are a great reservoir of savings, or whether it is the constriction of IRAs, or whether it is capital gains or the death tax and capital gains are dollar for dollar taxes on savings. Every dollar the government takes out of capital gains, every dollar that they take out of the death tax is a tax on savings on which taxes have already been paid, and they're no longer available to do their work in the United States of America. And I think that's wrong. I was asked one day, why did the Congress, at least before our majority came in, why are they continuously going after pension plans? And I said, well, the answer to that's very simple. It's the same answer Willie Sutton gave when he was asked, why do you rob banks? He said, that's where the money is. And so I've watched my colleagues up here go after the pension plans because that's where the money was that they could get more tax revenue into the federal government. Now, we've begun to turn that around. In 1997, we got a reduction in the capital gains rate from 28 to 20%, still not as low as I'd like for it to be. We got an increase in the exclusion on the death tax, still not where it ought to be, and we did much better in the bill this year. This year, we did some incredible things, which vetoed by the president, of course, as you know. We not only got the capital gains rate from 20 to 18, but we indexed the cost basis for inflation. Over and over again, when people sell stocks, they're paying a bulk of their taxes on inflation, not on real gain. And that is a robber of the savings of the people of this country. Most economists tell me that that's far more important than even getting the rate down to 15. If you can index the cost basis for inflation for the future and not tax that. And fascinatingly enough, the major impact of the inflationary gains as a negative is on people who earn under $100,000 a year. The majority of their gains are inflationary and not real gains. They would get the biggest benefit out of this provision that was in the act that we passed and got vetoed this year. We repealed the death tax in the bill this year. Repealed it. I never thought I'd live long enough to see the Congress do that. The Senate and the House voted to repeal the death tax. And we're going to be back again. That marker's out there. All of this relates to savings. And those savings are necessary to create jobs and to keep America moving and to increase productivity. I also have a plan to save Social Security. And I've been virtually a lonely warrior here on Capitol Hill, almost in Washington, who's been willing to literally step out and have a precise statutory plan to save Social Security for all time. Not just for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. The president says his plan saves it for 50 years. What happens after 50 years? You got a giant cliff. We need to have a long-term program that is solid, that we can rely on. And what does it do? It depends upon individual worker savings accounts that they can invest right up there in Wall Street or other areas that are solid investments. And what's that build? They can build individual wealth during their work lives, and then that becomes the fundamental source of their retirement, supplemented by Social Security if their annuity at retirement is not equal to the Social Security benefit. So nobody loses. And we don't touch Social Security benefits. We don't raise taxes. We draw on the earning power of the private sector. Those compounded earnings will save Social Security. But I can't get the White House to move. For some strange reason, organized labor is opposed to letting their own workers have savings accounts. I don't understand that. Because in Australia and in Great Britain, organized labor drove this into the law, where workers would have their personal savings accounts. But they are standing there and saying to President Clinton, you know, we don't support this. They're saying it to the Democrat leaders. There isn't a single Democrat who's been willing to go on this, and nor has the president been willing to embrace it. And yet nobody else has a plan. Oh, yes, there's one other plan. The other plan is simply this. The government takes the Social Security trust funds and invests them in the private sector, and the government begins to own the control of General Motors and IBM and the corporations in this country. And I see several negative head shakes out there. Well, you should feel good about your reaction. 80% of the American people agree with you, by every poll that I've ever seen. But that's the only other option unless you want to cut benefits and or raise taxes. And we need to move and move now while we've got time to watch these earnings develop and build up. And I'm going to continue to push on this, but it's a pretty lonely job when you're accused of being partisan because no Democrat will sign on to it. But the story has to be told. And then finally, let me tell you what my other major goal is, and I frankly am not sure I can get it done in the 1 year left to me because I'm not going to run for re-election next year. 30 years is long enough up here for anybody. Our income tax is the biggest negative facing America going into the next century. The biggest single negative. It exports jobs. Why is Chrysler a German corporation? Because of our income tax. Solely because of our income tax. Why is Bankers Trust Deutsche Bank? Because of our income tax. Why is Amoco British Petroleum? Why is Arco soon to become British Petroleum? Because of our income tax. These decisions should be made for economic reasons, not because of tax reasons. And I'm committed to stop that. And the one way we can do it, and the only way we can effectively give an advantage to America in our tax code rather than a giant disadvantage, and I'm like one of my colleagues who says, I'm a very fair individual. All I ever want is a fair advantage. And I want a fair advantage for the United States of America. And we can do that if we abolish the income tax completely and totally, not leave one shred of it. By the way, I want to get the IRS completely and totally out of your individual lives. Completely and totally. We're all in a tax trap. You know it. The harder you work, the longer you work, the more you pay. That's wrong. It should be the more you spend, the more you spend, the more you pay. That's fair and that's right. The tax should be collected on spending, not on income. And there are a lot of other good reasons for this. No two economists agree on what the definition of income is, and that's the reason why we got such a complicated code, and I have to deal with it all the time, because I'm told, oh, wait, this shouldn't be income. No, we got to change that. We change that and we create 2 or 3 other flaws as a result of the change that we've made of inequities. And you never stop that process. You will never have a simple income tax. Never. But if you go to a consumption spending tax, what happens? 0 tax on savings. 0. The amount of compliance costs are $250 billion a year for this income tax. Roughly what we spend on national defense, we spend on compliance. And all of that's got to be factored through in the price of our goods and services. And we can cut that back by 90%. But most importantly, and where we get into the next century, and this is something most Americans don't understand, we need a border adjustable tax. A tax that does not follow our products when they are exported. That is, the cost of government is eliminated from the price of our products when they are exported, and is charged to incoming foreign products when they enter this country, which no income tax can do of any kind. And then we have this giant fair advantage, certified by WTO, legal, not starting a trade war, which would be the most awful thing we could do for the future of this country. And factories will spring up for export in the United States of America, again, the likes of which we haven't seen since the end of World War II. The companies that have gone offshore for tax reasons will all come back within a year. Go to Bermuda, go to Aruba, go to the Cayman Islands, see the thousands of American corporations that have fled this country for only one reason, and that is because of our tax code. They'll all come back home. And I'm going to spare you my full 30-minute speech on this, and I'm going to close by saying just one thing. Princeton Economics did a survey of major foreign corporations in Japan and Europe and asked this question: what impact would it have on you if the U.S. abolished its income tax and went to a sales tax? And the responses were stunning. 80%, that's 80%, said they would build their new factories in the United States of America. 20% said they would move their international headquarters to the United States of America. We must win the battle of the global marketplace in the next century, and this is the single biggest thing that we can do to make that happen. Thank you very, very much. We have time for questions.
Mr. Chairman, we're truly honored to have you spend so much time with us, and I hope that even though you'll be back in Texas after the next election, you'll consider coming back to NIAF, because your vision is very interesting to this community. We're privileged now, and I'm going to abbreviate very quickly the introduction of our next key legislator. Bob Torricelli was elected to the Senate from New Jersey in 1996. He serves on the Judiciary, Foreign Relations, Government Affairs, and Rules Committees. Prior to his election, he served 14 years in the House, where he earned a reputation, and quite deservedly, as an expert on foreign affairs. He has been a tireless champion on issues related to the environment, gun control, and health. Please welcome Senator Robert Torricelli of New Jersey. The senator has a bill on the floor, so he has taken great pains to be with us. Senator, we welcome you.
Thank you very much, Dick. Thank you very much for your kind welcome. Dick's a person of extraordinary judgment, with the single exception of abbreviating my introduction. Been otherwise. I appreciate very much the chance to be with you. Some of you may not know that I couldn't always come here, but NIAF some years ago amended their bylaws to allow Sicilians to actually be part of this organization. It was a monumental change. And Frank Guarini, those of you who are corporate CEOs should seek to emulate Frank's CEO record himself. Frank is the leader of an organization whose market share has grown steadily for 100 years, never lost in the marketplace a single time, and that's the leadership of the Hudson County Democratic Party. It's been a remarkable record. The Senate is debating campaign finance reform, so if people seem a little edgy, this comes very close to home when you're around here. It goes to the operation of this institution and its control. And I know Trent Lott's going to come in a moment, and one good piece of career advice I've gotten through the years is when the majority leader is seeking to speak, get out of the way. So I will be brief, but I wanted to share a moment with you with a really very simple message that has something to do with our culture and our contributions to America through the years. As I think Dick Grasso would attest, these are remarkable times in American life. Fortune magazine some months ago noted they had reviewed 200 years of American economic life, and never found a period that was comparable in growth, inflationary stability, or employment. It is an extraordinary thing for a nation ever to be able to make that claim, but with an economy as mature as our own, at this stage of development, to be able to make that claim is genuinely extraordinary. But it raises the question, and it divides Americans really into two camps. We dominate the technologies of a new century. We've achieved levels of efficiency. Our corporate sector is leaner and better. The federal government may achieve surpluses not only unparalleled in our own history, but never reached by any nation in history. Potentially $3 trillion worth of surpluses, maybe $4 in the next 10 years. And so the question arises, what do you want to do with it? You know, through most of our lives, American government was really very simple. We had these debates about issues, but in fact, the priorities of the United States government were defined for us by history. We didn't choose our own agenda. Win the Cold War and deal with the budget deficit. As long as I've been in Washington, that was the agenda. Well, history took care of the Cold War, and now there's no budget deficit. And it raises the question for all of us about what is it we want to achieve now with government? Is it simply to maintain things as they are? Or do we have national ambitions? The one thing that separates America, you read de Tocqueville, the things that he found the most extraordinary about this country was the scale of ambition. I think he wrote that, he said, I've discovered, if I could paraphrase, the genius of America, they work for a time in which they will never live. They save for family they will never know. That's always been our creed. And if I can look to the many of the unique things that our people brought to this nation, that scale of thinking and ambition was a great part of it. We and other ethnic groups helped break the confines of narrow thinking. It is no coincidence that the great wave of Jewish and Polish and Italian immigration coincided with America breaking out of its traditional thinking, the Progressive Era and the New Deal, the antitrust busting to Social Security and minimum wage and human rights. They were not all born of this soil. They came some of the conflicts of the old world. Maybe there still beats in us enough of that ambition of our fathers to do it again. It is, I think, obvious that there is now virtually no level of leadership in America in business or finance or politics where our sons and daughters cannot aspire or do not now occupy. And so they will be part of this question. What do you want to achieve? Certainly there's still plenty to do in the country. We've created more jobs than Japan and Europe combined. We may dominate all the technology of the 21st century, but we do have 40 million people outside the private health care system. A third of our children are graduating from schools functionally illiterate. We are 18th out of 20 leading nations in the teaching of math and science. Our infrastructure is good, but it was built by our parents and our grandparents, and it is aging. There is work to do in America. We are a nation of paradoxes, the best health care system in the world, with the least access of any developed nation. The best universities and colleges of the world ever produced. And in my judgment, some of the worst secondary schools and high schools in the developed world. It's a time of paradoxes. There's your agenda. A nation now of surpluses and growth, I hope of ambition, with a lot can be done. And I hear on the distant horizon the sounds of the majority leader. A good and able man who I am working day and night to make into minority leader. You will genuinely see in your visit to the Senate, having been in the House of Representatives so many years, that for all that is said about American politics and some of the divisiveness I knew in the House of Representatives, that in this United States Senate, people reach across the aisle every day to work on issues, to work for the betterment of this country. I was very happy to be part of Senator Lott's effort, a worthwhile effort, for tax reductions this year. We've worked together on a number of issues. It speaks well of our countries that we can come from New Jersey and Mississippi, different ethnic backgrounds, different philosophies, but every day, something you will rarely see in the British Parliament, rarely in the Italian Parliament, rarely in the Bundestag, never in the Duma, rarely in the Diet. We reach across aisles for the betterness of this country every single day. Add it to your list of special things about America. Thank you all very, very much.
Thanks for being right. Well, there is little left to be said about our next very special guest, the Senate Majority Leader, Senator Trent Lott from Mississippi. Suffice to say, he enjoys a 75% positive rating from his constituents. Prior to his election to the Senate in 1988, he served 16 years in the House. A truly extraordinary leader, as Bob Torricelli indicates, a leader who can reach across the aisle to do what is right for America. Ladies and gentlemen, Majority Leader Senator Trent Lott.
Thank you very much. In Biloxi, Mississippi, I'm known as Trent Lotto by my Italian friends in Biloxi, Mississippi. Hey, I'm also known in Biloxi, Mississippi as Trent Lottovich to the Slavonian Lodge. I represent this international city, Biloxi, Mississippi. Some of you have heard of it. Some of you have even been there. As a matter of fact, it's a city that has been built over the years from the Biloxi Indians, and then every ethnic group that has come to America, particularly those that have come from fishing countries, some of them have wound up in Biloxi. So we have Greek Americans there. We have the Slavonian Lodge, where I sing with the male Slavonian chorus at Christmas, knowing nothing about what I'm singing, but I'm singing loudly. And of course we have the fleur-de-lis, because we had the French immigration into Biloxi. Italian friends. I was in law school with Joe Tadaro, who was one of my best friends. It's a great place. When I first started running for Congress, I couldn't get any traction in Biloxi. I couldn't figure out how to get the votes, and I had a very strong opponent from that region. Finally figured that you had to campaign ethnic group by ethnic group. I had more fun, and I wound up carrying Biloxi, Mississippi. So I'm glad to be with you and carrying my Italian name Lotto on this occasion. I just met with the president of the Church of Latter-day Saints of Jesus Christ, and he brought my family genealogy. I was a little nervous about it because the Lotts have, there were some bad actors along the way, and I was afraid what they would trace my name back to and my family back to. But then when it wound up being biblical, you remember Lot and Lot's wife, I decided, well, that's okay. No, it didn't go quite that far. But it's always great to have a colleague like Senator Torricelli say nice things. He's absolutely right. Every day he's working aggressively to raise money from you and everybody else to try to help his candidates to make me minority leader. And of course, I'm doing the same the other way. But in the process, we do still work together. And he's an interesting study because he has worked with me and the Republicans. He was only one of 5 Democrats that voted for our tax relief package that we passed earlier this year. That's not easy to do when you're the head of the campaign committee and you're voting for the Republican tax relief package. But he thought it was the right thing for his constituency in New Jersey, and he voted with us. And he also has worked with me on some education proposals. So rest comfortably. The New York Times and the Washington Post notwithstanding, we do work together across the aisle to try to do the right thing for our country. And it makes me feel good when we're able to do that back and forth across the aisle. When I saw that I would have the opportunity to be with you, it reminded me of some meetings we used to have years ago. Maybe some of you were there. Not many of you look old enough to have been there. Remember Silvio Conti? You remember Silvio, of course, our colleague in the House when we were over there together. And Silvio, of course, was the quintessential Italian-American and ranking Republican on the Appropriations Committee. Great character, irascible personality. In fact, I use a nickname for him that I now use with Ted Stevens, chairman of the Appropriations Committee, the Tasmanian Devil. Because when Silvio locked on to a subject, he was like a tiger, but a great guy. And I used to drop by his annual lunches that he would have in his office up on the 3rd floor of the Capitol, and I enjoyed his personality so much. In the Senate, of course, the man that I lean on the most in the Senate is Pete Domenici. Because not only has Pete been around a long time, Pete knows the way the budget system works, the appropriations bills. He's chairman of the Budget Committee. He's like number 3 or 4 on appropriations. He's chairman of the Energy and Water Appropriations Committee. And the thing that's disgusting about Pete, he's just smarter than the rest of us. Do you know how offensive that is to a senator? To have a senator that's smarter than you, and he knows, and you know. And it's really an uncomfortable sort of thing. But we deal with it when it comes to Pete Domenici. There was a picture on the front page of the New York Times a day or two ago of me talking to Pete, and I hope if you saw the picture, you could see in my eyes my love and respect for Pete Domenici. And so we have a lot of influence. One of the senators I was talking to this morning about a major issue is my #1 favorite Republican candidate for the Senate next year, bar none, Rick Santorum from Pennsylvania. And I was talking to Rick. Actually, he was on an airplane headed to somewhere in Pennsylvania. And I was talking to him about a very important substantive issue that he's knowledgeable on. He's one of those new members that's not only smart and aggressive, he does his homework. He digs into questions like Patients' Bill of Rights or campaign finance reform or the substance of a treaty. And we all need that. Well, I was told that in speaking to the Italian-American Foundation that you would maybe want kind of a legislative update, talk about the things we're working on. You're very knowledgeable on what's going on here. I just have to take a moment to remind you that a lot of good things have been happening in the Congress and in Washington over the last several years. Just read the papers, you'd never know that. But going back through the 80s and the 90s, as you know, we've had, with the exception of 1.5 years, we've had steady economic growth throughout the 80s and the 90s. And we have accomplished a lot of things that I never quite frankly thought we'd be able to achieve. When I came to Congress 27 years ago, at age 30, after having been a staff member for 4 years, I had some fundamental things I wanted to work on. Obviously, I wanted to maintain a strong national defense, because if we don't keep a strong national defense, our national security, our freedoms, our privileges, our opportunities in America and around the world could be endangered. And we made great progress in that during the 70s and the 80s. We've kind of slipped back in recent years because we have been cutting back on defense because the world is different. The wall came down, and now we have a problem with defense in that our morale is somewhat down, our retention is down, our recruitment is down, and our readiness is down. But during the last 1.5 years, we have kind of turned that around. We've started adding back money for defense. We have raised the pay for our military men and women. We have improved their retirement options. And as a matter of fact, retention is beginning to head back up. But we do have the smallest, most technologically advanced, most capable military force in the history of mankind, probably. So we have a lot to be proud of, but also a lot that we better be careful about, because we don't want to drop our guard at a critical time where we have an opportunity to really have a peaceful world now and in the future. The second thing I've always been committed to that we're still working on, and we've made some progress but not as much as I would like to make, and that is I still believe in the Jeffersonian philosophy of government, that the best government is the government closest to the people and the least government, particularly from Washington. I have faith in individuals and families and communities and elected officials and civic leaders in my home state and in your home states. I do believe that the best decisions are the ones that don't come out of Washington, but are made locally based on the knowledge of what the needs are. That's a continuing battle. That's a battle that involves more flexibility for local and state officials. It's a philosophy that should mean less regulatory control, more competition, more freedom. I'm a free trader. I believe it, and I'm from Mississippi, which has in the past been sort of a protectionist state. But I'm for free trade because I believe that everybody benefits from free trade. I believe that we should reach out to the rest of the world. And when we have free and unfettered trade, when we don't get hung up on sanctions, we wind up benefiting in America and around the world. And anytime Mexico becomes stronger or Canada becomes stronger, economically, I believe in the end, if we have good trade, America is stronger. So that's something we need to continue to work on, and we've got more that we need to do in that area. I'm going to call up in the next week or two a couple of free trade bills. The Caribbean Basin Initiative, which is an enhancement of the CBI. I think we can do more, should do more in trade with Central America and South America. The fact that we haven't passed fast-track legislation for the president or presidents, I think, is a terrible mistake. We should have passed it, and also the African Free Trade Bill will be called up in combination with CBI. The other thing is, I've always believed the federal government ought to live within its means, not spend more than you take in. That seemed to be an unachievable goal for some inexplicable reason, but now we've done it. This year we have this calendar year, the fiscal year that just ended, we actually had a surplus of money, not counting Social Security. And this year, We're struggling mightily, once again, to say we should not touch the Social Security Trust Fund. We should try to save the surplus as much as we can, spend it where we need to, whether it's on education or NIH, but make sure we don't dip into the Social Security Trust Fund. But we're dealing with this new problem, a surplus. Congress had to actually go to Webster's dictionary, surplus. You know, after deficits all these years and growing national debt, we were a little bit perplexed. And I found what I learned from my own state legislature a few years ago. I had some friends in the state legislature who said that as long as they had no money, everything was fine. Nobody complained or wanted the money. But one year, unbelievably, they showed up with a $300 million surplus. And everybody showed up and said, I want it. And it became a humongous fight in the state legislature to decide what to do with that surplus that they had. Now, my poor state is running a surplus every year, thanks to our growing economy, and also, I must confess, to dockside casino gaming. Now, understand, we don't allow it on shore. It's on the river and on the Gulf. But now we're having that problem. We have a little surplus, and everybody says, I want it. Defense wants it, housing wants it, education wants it, everybody wants it. So we're arguing over what are the right priorities. But that is a phenomenal achievement. And everybody wants to take credit. I think the Congress did it. President Clinton thinks he did it. You did it. The American people did it. In spite of being overtaxed and overregulated, the American economy is so strong, the American business and industry is so determined to do the job, to create businesses, to create jobs, to make money. In spite of the garbage you get from Washington, you're doing a great job. That's what brought in additional revenue. And now we can just control our insatiable appetite to spend. We can keep a surplus, we can pay down the national debt, and we can protect Social Security. Is that an important achievement or not? I think it is. Now, I also feel very strongly that if we're going to have this $3 trillion surplus, we ought to come up with a fairer tax code. We should reduce the tax burden. We should get rid of the marriage penalty tax. I ask every group I speak to, Republican, Democrat, Independent, how many of you think we ought to keep the marriage penalty tax? No hand goes up. And it's doubly important now because my daughter just got married last May. And she doesn't think it's fair because she and her husband both work. They ought to pay more because they got married. Is that idiocy or what? How do we do these things? The estate tax, the death tax, I'd like to find the turkey that came up with the idea we should tax death. We should make sure he has to pay taxes sooner rather than later. The truth of the matter is, I've done some research on it. The estate tax was used only for wartime. And the early history of this country was put on during wars and taken off when the wars ended, right up until the end of World War I, when at that time our president was not in good health. He didn't make sure it was taken away, and we've been stuck with it ever since. We ought to get rid of that. It's about making the tax code fairer. It's about American people that are paying too high taxes, and we ought to reduce the burden. It's not about Republican or Democrat. It's not about independent, rich or poor. It's about the fact that the tax code is not fair, and it is too high, and collectively, and we ought to reduce it. As long as I'm here, I'll continue to work on that. But I really believe we have an opportunity next year, if we elect the right people to the Senate, and you know I want more Republicans, Italian, French, Slavonian, Scottish, it makes no difference. And if we can hold the House and elect a Republican president, there are three big things that I think we ought to do. Just three. And if we get these three done, I'm going to check it to the next generation. I'll say to my son, I've done the best I can. I've left you a surplus. We've cut your taxes. We've preserved Social Security. We reformed Medicare. This country is strong economically, and militarily we're strong. Now, you take it from here. And we're close to doing those things. But we need your help. We don't need a lot of backbiting and complaining and griping. Give us some good ideas and help us to do the fundamentals that are so important, the fundamentals that made us so lucky to be Americans, no matter where we're from. Every day I thank God that I have an opportunity to be a senator, to succeed great senators from my state like John Stennis, the son of a shipyard worker, pipe fitter, union member, and a school teacher from Pascagoula, Mississippi, gets to be the majority leader. Like so many of you that have been so successful in business and industry and leadership in America, I have lived the American dream. I want to make sure that my son and my daughter and my grandchildren will have the opportunity to live that dream. That's what it's all about. I could leave tomorrow, live happily in Pascagoula, Mississippi, see Ole Miss play football every weekend, and make somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 10 times as much money as I make now, easily. So why don't I do it? Because I do think I have an obligation here, and because I do believe one man and one woman with a vision and a desire and honesty and integrity can make a difference. That's what it's all about, and thank you for letting me be with you today.
Senator, I know I speak for everyone in the room when I say how truly privileged we are that you have taken time from an extraordinarily busy schedule to be with us, to share that message, but most importantly, to be working on behalf of our kids and our grandkids to make sure the American dream lives on. Thank you so very much, Senator.
He came back out, let on like nothing had happened, and went out the other door.
Senator Trent Lott, again, please. Well, I do hope that each of you found the morning to be valuable and insightful. The National Italian American Foundation is your voice here in this, our nation's capital. It's not just a governmental exercise, it's a participative exercise between all Americans and those whom we send here to represent us. NIAF truly is a very important vehicle, a funnel through which you can express your views, and most importantly, we can all come together to share ideas and hopefully, respectively, go back and make our businesses stronger, our communities more viable, and our way of life in this country even greater than it's been over the course of the history of this great nation. I want to thank each of you for taking time to be with us this morning. We move now to our luncheon, and of course our very special luncheon guest speaker, Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan, who will, I'm sure, be asked a question or two by the twin towers of investment wisdom, Gabelli and Acampora, and I'm certain that the chairman will be consistent with his historical, non-committal answers. I want to thank you all for being with us, and we will see you at the luncheon. Thank you very much.
The U.S. House returns Monday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern for morning hour, when members may speak on any topic. Legislative business begins at 2. Next week, more work on fiscal 2000 federal spending and education issues. That's on our companion network, C-SPAN. Here's a look at what's next. Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan. Later, a meeting of the Panama Canal Business Council, followed by a gathering of the Alliance for Health Reform on prescription drug costs. Then, a congressional briefing before the National Italian American Foundation. Our Campaign 2000 website is your online resource for politics. There you can find schedule information for upcoming programs, watch recent segments, including speeches by presidential candidates, interviews and party conventions, and link to other Campaign 2000 sites. Visit us at cspan.org/campaign2000. Next, remarks by Federal Reserve Board Chairman Alan Greenspan. He was on Capitol Hill today addressing a gathering of Italian-American business leaders. He talked about the economy's preparation for the Y2K computer issue. The National Italian-American Foundation hosted this 25-minute event.
The Italian-American Foundation truly appreciates your being here to our sixth Leadership Economic Day. And I've noticed the desserts that we have before us. You know, we're about to listen to Alan Greenspan, who will be introduced to you shortly. And it was agreed upon among some people that I talked with that only you, Alan, is capable of blowing the top off the Capitol. At any rate, another line, just desserts. I hope it's not that we deserve it. At any rate, we had a wonderful morning this morning with the leadership of both sides of the aisle that has spoken to us. And we really had some very fine presentations. You saw the difference of philosophy between the two parties. But I don't know if anybody's changed their loyalty as a result of this morning's presentations. The Democrats are still Democrats, and Republicans, of course, stay Republican, as most of you probably are in this room, if my guess is correct. This afternoon, of course, we're going to have the White House make a presentation. John Podesta, the Chief of Staff to President Clinton. And as a matter of fact, tomorrow night, of course, we've been confirmed at our gala. Once again, the President and the First Lady will be with us at our dinner Saturday evening. And Maria, you will be our Master of Ceremonies. Usually it's Jack Valenti, but we're honoring him at the event. I want to bring on someone who we're all very, very proud of, a person who really has been talented, energetic, outstanding, and who has taken the New York Stock Exchange to greater heights. A man who has been your Master of Ceremonies this morning, and will introduce our celebrated Chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank, Richard Grasso. Dick Grasso.
Well, thank you very much, Frank, and I do hope if the rear of the room can hear us, this sound system is a bit muted, but we are, as Frank said, once again truly honored, and I feel very fortunate to have the privilege of introducing our special guest at lunch, Federal Reserve Board Chairman Alan Greenspan. 2 years ago, those of you who were with us heard Chairman Greenspan speak. At the conclusion of that presentation, we added to his extraordinarily long list of accomplishments, both inside and outside of government service, something that has endured in the chairman's mind. He was inducted as a lifetime honorary Italian. Which tempts me to introduce the chairman as Chairman Alan Greenspan. But I suspect the media would turn their cameras off and you would not have nearly the focus that you do right now. Over the past 12 years, Alan Greenspan has served under 3 presidents as chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. His guiding of monetary policy has been nothing short of extraordinary. He is the second longest serving chairman in the Fed's history. As I'm so proud to say, when he was in the private sector as chairman of Townsend Greenspan, one of his many clients happened to be none other than the NYSE. But most, I think, dramatic in terms of introducing this chairman is a singular statistic, one that we on Wall Street watch quite moment by moment, beat by beat of one's heart. And this I think, says it all about the extraordinarily successful tenure he has enjoyed at the Fed. Since assuming the post Chairman of the Federal Reserve, Chairman Greenspan has watched but not commented on a 7,606-point rise in the Dow Jones Industrial Averages. Extraordinary. Ladies and gentlemen, a man who has served both our nation in government and our nation in the private sector, the truly extraordinary leader of the Federal Reserve, Chairman Alan Greenspan.
Oh, I'm sorry you stopped talking, Richard. I was hoping you'd just keep going on and we'd find we had run out of time and then I could just eat dessert and go home. Very much appreciate the fact that both Pete Domenici and John LaFalce, who originally invited me to participate in your briefings more than once, in fact this is my third time, either I've made a good impression or they're getting truly desperate. In any event, this year's subject, business, the economy, and the new millennium, made a choice of topic quite easy. While I suspect I will not add terribly much beyond what you already know, that this group of business people know about the whole millennium question and your efforts to remediate and test computer systems in preparation for the rollover at the end of the year, I would nonetheless like to raise with you some of the issues I have considered and addressed recently in a number of different fora about the likely impact of Y2K. We are continuously updating our knowledge, obviously, as we get closer and closer to the time, but certain things are beginning to become fairly evident at this point. As you well know, we face an exceptionally complex problem that has required and will continue to require the commitment of significant amount of resources to fix. The good news is that the evidence is becoming more persuasive that our electronic infrastructure will be ready for the century day change. The public's understanding of the degree of our Y2K readiness has also grown, and fears of widespread disruptions around the CDC appear to be waning, though we are not as yet home free. There is nothing exactly like the century date change in our historical annals, from which we can infer its potential consequences. But as a standard for monitoring developments, it is simply unrealistic to expect our advanced technology to function any better on January the 1st, the year 2000, than it has on any other day of the year. Moreover, while systems may fail as they have in the past, these failures never have resulted in broader and persistent, that is, systemic, breakdowns in our economy. In the event of breakdowns short of systemic, history teaches us that businesses are remarkably adaptive. In our market-based economy, economic incentives ensure that resources quickly move to their most productive activities. In a crisis situation, whether systemic or short of that, companies expeditiously redeploy their labor and capital resources to facilitate the restoration of their key operations. Corporate management is wholly aware that a slow response to a breakdown can bring revenue losses in the short run and an erosion of their customer base in the long run. Simply put, in our competitive economic environment, the ability to recover quickly from a serious technical problem can literally be a matter of survival for some firms. Fortunately, our country has the skilled, well-educated workforce that is a precondition for such quick action. While ingenious solutions can sometimes originate from the executive suite, more often than not they grow out of the ability of engineers, technicians, and workers on the factory floor to improvise a temporary fix for a critical problem. Depth of experience and the ability of our workers to think outside the box have prevented many a problem from turning into a disaster. Thus, while no one knows exactly what will happen on January 1st, the CDC is a truly idiosyncratic event. We do have a good idea of how our economy will respond if problems develop. As we prepare for the rollover, it is most important to keep in perspective just how far we have come in our Y2K preparations. 3 years ago, only the largest and arguably the most forward-looking of organizations had mobilized for the century date change. Today, many firms and government agencies have completed their testing, and those institutions that were late off the block are working very diligently to be ready by the end of the year. While it is easy to obsess about the few institutions in our society that may not be ready, let us not lose sight of the fact that the overwhelming majority of us are not only prepared but have contingency plans to deal with breakdowns. It is the economic effects of businesses and households endeavoring to adjust to the CDC in the next few months that I see as replacing technical concerns as our major challenge. I'm not saying that we would have been better off if the existence of the Y2K problem had never been publicized. In that event, the remedial actions that have been expended over the past 2 years would surely have fallen short. Although the desirability of publicizing the existence of a pending significant technical breakdown was never in question and never should have been, it always raised the potential hazard of an outsized, if only partly informed, disruptive reaction by the public. Given the potentially broad range of uncertain outcomes at the CDC, the cost of advanced preventive preparations, in most cases, is probably correctly perceived by businesses and households to be low or at least acceptable. Thus, with their own remediation efforts either complete or nearing completion, many large businesses are currently evaluating the readiness of their suppliers and the local infrastructure on which they depend. Based on such assessments, these companies are deciding whether, for example, to hold inventory levels about their tight, just-in-time programs as a precaution against Y2K-related disruptions. Because businesses are effectively buying insurance against an uncertainty, the less uncertainty, the smaller the perceived insurance need. Thus, accurate, credible, and timely information on the general state of readiness will be essential to reducing uncertainties in the months ahead. Businesses then can make more informed decisions of the type and magnitude of the precautions they need to take. If only a small percentage of business choose to add to their inventories as a hedge, the effect on production will of course be insignificant. However, should a large number of companies want to hold even a few extra days of inventories, the necessary, albeit temporary, increase in production or imports to accommodate such stock building could be quite large. While the evidence of precautionary inventory hedging to date is mixed, in the financial sphere, borrowers and lenders are clearly taking steps to build liquid assets and reduce their reliance on credit markets around the end of the year. This is reflected in a noticeable rise in deposit and commercial paper rates for funding that would be outstanding over year's end. Many corporate treasurers have moved forward their debt offerings to avoid any chance of a dearth of credit availability in the fourth quarter or difficulties funding short-term liabilities. The potentially most important piece in the Y2K puzzle for the rest of the year is the uncertain response of the American consumer as the year end approaches. A small number of households, driven by fear of the unknown, tell pollsters that they are planning to build large stockpiles of food, water, fuel, and cash as the millennium approaches. Most, however, profess much more limited plans. Nonetheless, we at the Federal Reserve must be prepared for all contingencies and have made special plans for currency availability in the remote possibility of heavy withdrawals from banks. I trust that such withdrawals will be modest, since, as I have said often before, the safest thing for consumers to do with their money around year-end is to leave it where it is. In summary, no one really knows what will happen when the century rolls over. The century date change, to repeat, is a unique event, and the complexity of the problem suggests that something is likely to slip through the cracks. But as I mentioned earlier, the probability of a cascading of computer failures in mission-critical systems is now negligible, given the testing that has been done, the backup plans that are in place, and the greater adaptability and ingenuity of the American worker. Moreover, the evidence of an increasingly compliant computer infrastructure appears to have assuaged at least some of the public's earlier Y2K concerns, according to several recent surveys. Nonetheless, we have not yet reached the period of extra heavy focus by the media on the century date change. It is too compelling a story for audiences that thrive on countdowns to the unknown. As attention heightens and rumors inevitably mushroom, it is important that what is known and what is not known be clearly articulated by those of us in both public and private leadership positions in Y2K management. In the final analysis, facts are the only antidote for rumors. We at the Federal Reserve are optimistic that computer problems associated with the century date change and the response to the CDC will not be a major event for our nation. This is a testament to the extraordinary efforts of thousands of far-sighted technicians and business planners who, confronted with an intangible and abstract problem, have been able to convince businesses and governments to marshal vast resources for remedial actions. This has been a truly impressive feat. If we avoid fear-induced significant economic responses in the months ahead, the century date change will hopefully replicate the saga of the dog that did not bark. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being with you. And it remains a pleasure to be an honorary Italian.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of the board of the National Italian American Foundation, let me say how truly privileged and honored we are that once again you've joined us. The work you've done over the last 12 years in leading the Federal Reserve has benefited all Americans, and we truly feel privileged to have you as one of our own. Thank you so very much. We now will adjourn to our White House briefing. Thank you all for being with us.